I
This
guess.
is the unfortunate truth. We are slow learners.
So, oh, oh man, I wouldn't say slow, but yeah, it's just interesting to learn about history and colonialism in a different way, especially because we tend to believe what history books says, but the history books is just one side of the tale,
Yeah, absolutely.
and not even sometimes it's not even the side that matters. I mean,
Sometimes it's
it's
open
that third
lies.
party. Yeah.
Sometimes it's blatant lies. There are things that even today still in recognized history circles are recognized as being the truth. That there are blatant lies. A
It's
good example of this is this thing called the Byzantine Empire. The Byzantine Empire was invented 400 years after the fact. These people never called themselves the Byzantines. What had happened was the Romans, they'd had a lot of trouble with the barbarians, most especially Hannibal, who managed to come to within 15 kilometers of Rome and hang out there for over a decade without them being able to get rid of him. They were also having issues reaching some of their more distant lands, and they were getting beat up about it. They also realized quickly that Rome, even though it's Rome, it wasn't a strategically very defensible place. Okay, it's right next to the ocean. You have the mountains right past it, which can be crossed by virtually anyone. This is how Hannibal managed to get there in the first place over the Alps. And by the time they figured out he was there, he was already, like I said, 15 kilometers out of Rome. So the Romans, they decided, well, we have this other place that's firstly much more central in our empire, and it's also much more defensible because at the same time that it maintains our shipping superiority, it's also already been in constant warfare for hundreds of, maybe even thousands of years at this point already. And this place was what we now call Istanbul.
oh yeah.
So the Romans, they moved the seat of their empire from Rome
There's
to Constantinople.
yeah.
And that was that. That was, imagine the Americans deciding to move the seat of their power from Washington to California.
Santiago. Oh,
For
yeah.
whatever reason, they might do it, right? And at this point, well, 400 years after this happened, let me be clear. They moved it to Constantinople. They still called themselves Romans. They were still Romans. This was very much still the Roman Empire, right? 400 years after the fact, this I can't remember his name. Some German guy comes along and he rewrites the history books completely by saying that at the moment that Rome moved their seat of power from Rome to Constantinople, it was no longer the Roman Empire.
Most conversations stay safe.
This one doesn't. I'm Vivian. I ask the questions people rehearse and then don't say.
I'm Tiaan, the one who pushes back.
And this is Cosecha Salvaje, Wild Conversations.
Every week, a new conversation.
I mean, I see the difference. I have to give you that.
I see.
Yeah.
Very good.
Let's talk about something that is so popular now. But
Shoot, let's see.
for me it wasn't until now. And I mean
Yes.
when people talk about colonialism, I mean it's a normal topic for South America because we were a colony from
Of
Spain.
course.
And it was not as much as it was, I don't know, 5 years ago, but it was celebrated that Christopher Columbus came and like discovered us, and there's like these monuments uh
Yes.
we erected for him and all his troops, and it was like fun to name the three ships he came with, la Niña, la Pinta, y la Santa Maria. You know, it was
See.
it was part of our past, but
Yes.
that's it. That's
Yes.
and it's like I think it's like how you call it when you fall in love with your kidnapper. I forgot the name of that syndrome.
Stockholm syndrome.
Yes, yes,
It is
because
a
we
little bit of that.
yes, because we all know what they did, and we've talked about it
Yes.
before in
I know.
several
Yes.
occasions. Like,
Well, I mean, Columbus himself. I hate to kind of come up for the guy, but to be fair, he was kind of a bumbling idiot. Like he's not the one who did the horrible things. It was Cortez who came after him that brought, the terror and the violence.
but
And
I don't know
yeah,
if Cortez was judged, but Christopher Columbus
no,
was
because
judged.
very few people, unless they know their history, even knows who Cortez was, and he was a fucking complete animal, like a
But Spain
complete
knew,
animal.
and why did Spain only judge Christopher Columbus?
Well, because even acknowledging him for them is kind of awkward, right? Like because he made them very, very rich.
Fair enough.
Okay, that you know, like and he was Christopher Columbus didn't so much stumble upon didn't so much discover the Americas as I mean, he called
Claimed.
them Indians for a reason. He thought he was in India. This guy, uh, he'd fucked it up completely. Okay, so I guess he just became the scapegoat of a generation that don't really understand the history of what happened, and they also like to nitpick history. This is uh, the big thing, and it's the same in South Africa. Obviously, we have our own version of Christopher Columbus there. His name is Jan van Riebeeck, and now it's even a big joke, like because the government still blames poor van Riebeeck for all of their mistakes today,
Oh,
because people 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 don't understand how governments work. They don't understand how and why why colon, colonialism was even a thing in the first place. They they just see it from an either or perspective. It's got to be either good or it's got to be bad. It can't be a fucking
both.
complicated
Yeah.
mess, which is exactly what it was. Uh, yeah, it's a complicated mess when it comes to colonialism, and that's why you're always kind of when discussing a topic like this, kind of flirting with cancellation in today's culture, because the line between facts and opinions have been so drastically
Yes.
blurred, especially when it comes to that particular topic. That man, it's hard. It,
And
it's
it's not only hard, it's just that people started talking about colonialism again, like in the modern times. So, in terms of
yes,
Colombia, I don't know if we were blessed or cursed, because history knows, like, Colombia was the rejected child from like massive immigration, even though they opened the doors and they were like, oh no, you're like too jungly, you're too wild for our Europeanness. So they
yes,
never came. So we were like very like in a box. Like for
yeah,
me, colonialism was only Spain. I didn't
yeah.
even know like the English colonized the north
The
part of America.
the
It,
English, the French, the Dutch, they were all in South
exactly.
America.
But parts were didn't touch Colombia. And not that in history here.
Yes,
Like history here is like another level. I don't know now, but in my time we were talking about civilizations like before,
yeah,
like Mesopotamia, and like super far away from our reality.
Yes.
So, like, we knew we had ties with the US, or I knew we had ties with the US, but you don't feel them now. Because
Exactly.
I mean,
Yes.
you as a foreigner, you maybe have a better perspective when you came to Colombia. And so that I feel we're still like very rudimentary, like very, very traditional in our ways. Um,
Yes.
not like any other place, like Brazil or maybe Argentina, that there's like a level of flexibility in
Yeah.
currencies and things like that.
Man, I couldn't tell you exactly why that is. A part of it is going to be like uh, they just had such a much bigger effect in other places. For instance, what happened when Cortes eventually came? This would have all been, you know, Central America, not really South America.
Exactly.
By virtue of the giant green ocean that's between you guys and Central America, it was just hard for them to have such a massive effect there. But then, later there was Grenada and, Gran Colombia. So later, the later stages of colonialism tended to be more economical and less violent. Okay. So I guess when it comes to all of the bits of history that they nitpick from colonialism, they're going to talk about things like Cortes murdering hundreds of thousands of Incas, okay, which they're right to do, but they're not going to talk about the boring stuff that happened in Colombia. Just like in Colombia right now, probably nobody is talking about the fact that the United States pretty much stole Panama from you guys. Like,
Yeah.
it's literally a land grab. Panama does not exist. It's a part of Colombia. And sure, Panamanians might say something different, but let's all be clear. Panama is basically the 52nd state, right? Like, it's America. Okay, they get the benefits of being America, but they're being used like they're Americans, like it's American soil, and mostly because of their and this is also why this was an important piece of land for the Americans. So that in itself is a type of colonialism, a type of underground colonialism, which is much harder to spot and much more boring to talk about because it's all about economics and politics. There were no great tyrants and great, it's just not so easy to romanticize something like that and get people dancing in the street over something like that.
Fair
which is
enough.
which is why the people who will tell you outright that they'll write off colonialism as complete evil, as if it can only be done by people who are completely insane and hell-bent on destruction and violence. They First of all, they misunderstand some of the core principles of what it is to be a human civilization. It- Colonialism is as old as humanity is. Okay, it's for always been a thing. And if you want to get at the roots of it, you got to go back to the very earliest forms of this, which were the empires. Because what was the empire other than a bunch of colonies connected by land?
Mm.
But then when the Brits came along and they built an empire that was no longer connected, suddenly we started calling it a colony, because a colony literally just means sending a bunch of people to go and live somewhere else, but claiming a piece of land for those people to live on. Okay, that's what it means to colonize. In other words, you have a city. If you send some satellite, if you create some small town, some satellite town, that's a colony. Okay, it doesn't have to be across the ocean. And most of the colonies that ever existed was never across the ocean, far, far away, with a bunch of strange people. It was people taking land from their neighbors or moving into pieces of, let's call them wildlands. Maybe there wasn't anyone in particular who claimed specific ownership over a piece of land, and you could just go and take it. But this also had complications, because if you think about it, we're two states that live close together. I go and grab this piece of land, you go and grab that piece of land, and suddenly you're a little bit jealous because I got all the good stuff and you ended up with the desert. And now you're saying things like, okay, we need to maybe compete for the good things, you know? And that's what happened. That was the English's game plan from the very beginning. They didn't, it would have been very easy for them to colonize the Sahara Desert. They never did that because there's nothing there. It's a hard place to live. It's an expensive place to live. Because of that, you can't grow anything. There's no natural resources. It was no good to them. So it's still to this day pretty much what I would call wildlands, places claimed by nobody.
That is so interesting
So,
because
man, this is so complicated.
it is complicated, but that's the part that they don't teach us. And I'm pretty sure, like, most of us are very lazy to just go and find out what's happening really in the world, because, like, in the modern times, let's say, besides the worldwide wars that we had back in the 50s, I've never heard anybody talking about colonialism so strong until this year, when the Americans took the Venezuelan president. I mean, people have mentioned colonialism, but nobody. I mean, I guess we don't relate colonialism with economy for some reason. It's just like you said, like, we just, like, most of us relate colonialism with taking territories.
Yes.
That's about it. But nobody's really talking about, like, what the French are doing, what the Americans are doing, and like, understand that mostly the whole economy goes either in dollars or in euros, and we all depend on it.
Yeah. If you look at something like what's been a major topic of discussion nowadays, oil. Okay. At some point, the world just decided we were going to trade oil in US dollars, regardless of where, you have Arab nations selling oil to other Arab nations, and they're all paying in dollars. Now, if that doesn't make any sense to you, it shouldn't, because it doesn't make any sense. It wasn't made. This is the force of the market. In other words, this is the Americans using their financial power to force other people to do things that benefit them. Okay. Because the Americans know if everybody trades oil in US dollars, there will always be a demand for our currency, and therefore that will make us rich. Okay. Just by virtue of that, our currency will remain strong because it's being used to trade very important resources in the world. Colonialism can take many different forms, and has over the past centuries. And nitpicking what you decide is colonialism and what isn't can kind of blur the lines a little bit. Like I said, Panama was basically stolen. It was a country created with the entire purpose of it not being a part of Colombia. The Americans said, okay, we can't claim this and call it America outright, because that would be going too far. So they basically claimed it and made it theirs outright, but they gave it a different name, and they installed some leadership that would do the things that they needed Panama to do. Okay, so they found some little helpers in Panama, and they said, okay, no, this they're basically a vassal state. If we look back at the imperial maps, you'll see a lot of vassal states like that. In other words, I'm not gonna come there and rule you directly, but you're gonna do what I say.
Because you're free because of me.
Anglo American, which
Okay.
is basically they're this conglomerate that mines, and if you check, they mine all over the world, and all of this money from mining all of these resources, it's being funneled straight to the UK and Americas, and they do pretty much everything in their power to make sure that the people who live in the places where they're mining get as little as possible. I mean, and they will do this by saying things like, "Oh, but we're creating all of these jobs and
For
we're paying
you.
all of these people." Yes, yes, yes,
So
we're
you should
doing
be
this, and in
thankful.
some cases, yes, sure, and in some cases, the political and business will or ability is not there to exploit these resources. So this makes it a very comfortable excuse for them to say, "Hey, listen, you couldn't do this on your own. The only reason there is even a mine here is because we are here. We are taking all of the risk. We're spending all of the money." And you might look at that and you might think, well, yeah, they're kind of right. Okay, because unfortunately, again, no good and bad, only gray, right? So the problem is they're doing everything also in their power to make sure that it stays that way. Because if, for instance, Africa is another good example. I think Africa had it almost the worst, right? Like African people have been placed under the thumb for centuries. Okay. And the reason it doesn't seem that they can get it right is because they simply now at the stage where they don't trust the people who can help them. Okay. And for
Well,
good
because
reason,
they
because the people who could help them never have. Okay. The
they
people who
come with
could help
false
them have always just
promises.
exploited them.
Mm.
Yes, yes. And this is where you have guys like, you know, I almost don't even want to say his name because it's got this kind of mythical thing about it. But when you have guys like Karl Marx come into the picture and say things like, the only reason capitalism works is because there's someone to exploit. Okay, if there were no one to exploit, then capitalism would be completely gone, which may or may not be true. It doesn't really matter. Money will always gravitate to a few people, and other people will almost always be getting poorer anyway, regardless.
It's just interesting what you're saying, because in that way, we have to say that colonialism never went away. It's just changed its facade. It's not about
Yes.
taking your territory. It's
The
about
British Empire never collapsed. The British Empire
exactly.
never collapsed. It turned into a bank.
Exactly. It's just
Yes.
like making you pay to stay in your land. For some
Exactly.
reason, we like whoever come, like we owe you for the right to live in
Yes.
my house for
Yeah.
reasons that I don't get it, but that's how it works. And it makes me think about um like the little villagers in Colombia. I don't know if it works the same in Africa or anywhere in the world, but the little, like the
Yeah.
villagers, most of them left and abandoned their houses just because it was not easy to live there, because somebody else decided that their houses was now theirs. I mean their houses were not theirs anymore, but somebody else, and they needed to pay for the rent in exchange
Yeah.
of like security, safety, because they couldn't do it for themselves. They wanted to be safe because there was a lot of bad people around. I'll keep you safe and you stay home.
Yeah. Even the best run governments, if you think about it, if you look at, let's take a place that's been previously advantaged as opposed to those little villages. Let's look at a place like London City itself.
Mm.
To live in London City, you become one of the most taxed people on earth. Okay. And especially, the liberal far left types will say like places like we'll name places like Sweden and Norway and so on and so forth, the kind of Nordic countries, and say, but oh, look how far they have come. But the reality is that the people in those countries pay enough taxes to feed 10 families in Africa. Okay. the governments there are nothing but protection rackets. And the more you pay, the better the service you get from them. But that's unfortunately how modern diplomacy works for the guy in the street. They might think they're, these great, kind of, omnipresent entities that are doing a really good job at running a country, but the very best governments in the world are not as well run as the average corner sweet shop is, because the sweet shop, it will go out of business if it does something wrong. Governments, they get away with literal murder every day, and there's no consequences for them. This is why governments suck so badly, especially, the more how can we say that the modern the more modern democratic a government is, the more it sucks at doing things. They're just awful at everything.
I was reading about that, like the ways colonialism changed. Like now, like we were saying before, now it's death or like brain drain. And I was just reading about Haiti, about how to be able to be free of slavery, they had to pay reparations to France because
Yes, they had to
so
buy themselves essentially.
yes, it's just like
Yes.
they call it reparations for them because France lost their slaves.
Yes.
That is
Yes.
madness.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
Essentially.
And that's why reparations. That's why reparations, by the way, are a terrible idea, because it just keeps going around in a friggin' circle, right?
Yeah.
Because if you look at reparations, you'll have to start from the beginning, because it's not like some slaves were more enslaved than others. So now we have to pay reparations to every slave, which means the Slavic countries will have to pay
Oh yeah.
reparations to the Nordic companies. The Nordic companies will have to pay reparations to the Arab countries. The Arab countries would actually have to pay reparations to almost everybody, and so would the American nations, and so on and so forth, until you find somebody that, you know, like for instance in Japan, you'll have the issue where the Mongols would have to pay reparations to the Chinese. The Chinese would have to pay reparations to the Mongols and the Japanese. You see, it just never ends,
Complicated. Yeah.
right? Yeah, this is what I said in the beginning. History is not a nice neat. These are are good people, and these are bad people. That's not how it worked. Okay, everybody did this. I don't know. It's
It's
just a mess.
it is a mess. It is a mess. And now also about like the new way to get people. It's like instead of like kidnapping people as slaves, now it has changed in a way that is so sophisticated that nobody noticed. And we all
Nobody
thought
knows that they're
nobody
slaves.
exactly, and we all
Yes,
thought it was such a wonderful opportunity, but it's not. It's literally
yes,
a
yes,
new way
yes.
to slave people, which are
In many
the
ways, when you had the British Empire, and I'm going to keep coming back to the British Empire, the Spanish Empire, it was very much the same kind of vibes. Also, the Dutch were a little bit different. Actually, there's a reason many people would only deal with the Dutch, because the Dutch, they didn't like the violence that was being committed by all of the other empires around. They were always merchants and traders. Okay, so the Dutch actually invented this form of exploitation where you kind of give a little bit, and they realized that they could get a lot richer by it being a little bit of a two-way street. They realized you only needed to put a little bit of water on the plant for the plant to produce more fruit. Okay. And they also realized that if you go by the veins of, the Cortezes, and you just murder everybody, there's nobody to carry the gold back to the ships. So that's a bad idea. So the Dutch, they were a little bit different in this sense. They started they were kind of ahead of their time in a way that what the Britons and the Americans are doing now are much more along the lines of what the Dutch were doing from the beginning. They weren't really going out and conquering massive empires. They were simply trading and exploiting via a system of commerce. Okay, they set up the economy in such a way that it benefited them. And again, I think it's also important to notice that if you look at these European nations who are doing these kinds of things, and I'm not really defending them, I'm just stating basically if you ever wondered why somebody would go out of their way to go and conquer some other place, it's probably because these people's lives literally depended on it. Okay. The English, they became the British Empire because of the fact that they were surrounded by people like France, Spain, and others who wanted to destroy them. And they're just this tiny little island. Okay, so they couldn't do what they needed to do to protect themselves
Alone.
without expanding. Okay, the way that you need to protect yourself is to build a lot of ships, a lot of warships. And if you have only a limited amount of forests, you need to go somewhere else to cut down a forest to build the warships. And then when you have the warships, you sit in this position where you have to find people to man these warships and fight for you in your wars. And this all seems a little bit convoluted, but if they didn't do that, they would no longer exist. Okay, they'd be gone. The French would have wiped them out, and we'd have seen that that little island as a part of France right now. Many people also don't know that the English were colonized themselves. Okay, there's a reason why when you go to the south, the kind of southwest coast of England, you can't pronounce the names of these of the streets and the cities anymore.
The Welsh.
Yes, well, the Normans came, the Vikings came, and kicked the shit out of the place for a very long time. Normandy in France was not named that way just because. It's because it was taken from the French king by the Normans. And also, while we're on the topic of the Vikings, by the way, they were the first ones to commercialize slavery. Okay. So what had happened was the Vikings, they ended up in the Nordic states, obviously, and they realized it's a kind of shit place. Okay, it's fuck off cold here. There's not a lot of arable land around. We can basically grow a little bit of grain, and we can grow some goats. Okay, it's kind of shit. But however, they knew that they were Caucasian. They knew they came from the Caucasus Mountains. So a big part of Viking culture was trying to get back to Persia. Now, obviously, at some point they figured out how to navigate the open water, which is what was the technological advancement that allowed them to become one of the first colonizers. And they did eventually make it back to Persia, and they found the Ottomans there. And being you know, I don't want to. They were practical people. Let's call it that way. Like they didn't just raid and pillage. They also wanted to trade. They were also merchants. Okay, so if they found you and they couldn't trade with you, they would raid you and take what you had and left. Obviously, the Ottomans were quite well protected through various other conflicts that they had, and the Vikings decided not to fight with them, but rather to trade with them. Okay, because also the Ottomans had another very important resource, which was the Ottomans had access to India, which meant they had steel. So if you're fighting in the Middle Ages, if two men are fighting and one has an iron sword and the other one has a steel sword, the guy with the steel sword wins 10 out of 10 times. Steel is just that much better a product for making weapons, for making ships, for doing anything you want to do with a kind of hard substance like that. What the Arabs didn't have access to was people to work in their cities. Okay, they needed somebody to exploit, and the Vikings were like, "Well, we know of someone. Okay, we can we can sail up the Adriatic here with our fancy ships and go grab you some right now." That's, by the way, where the word slave comes from. It comes from the word Slav. So the Vikings would grab the Slavic peoples by the hundreds of thousands and sell them to the Arabs in exchange for iron, which made the Vikings able to conquer places like England and France in the first place. So they're the ones who were the first ones to go somewhere, put someone on a ship and sell them as a slave somewhere else. This was totally their idea. Not unironically, the exact same people the liberals now say are better than all of us because of their liberal policies. And look how much better it is to live in Norway than it is to live here in America. Yes, it's because of they were just first, and nobody remembers that they were basically the inventors
The
of this
original.
process, of this economic process that spiraled out of control and has been copied so many times.
And it's very interesting because now, like, I guess I never connected the dots until like reading about this stuff. And it's like they switch, like they don't need to like kidnap anybody now. They just need a really great
Yeah,
tagline for you to buy the idea that going somewhere else is better than your own home. It's
yeah,
like the American dream. It's like, okay, you are
yes, exactly.
talented, you have skills, you have the brain, perfect. You are a great asset for America or for Europe. Come along, and I
Yeah.
will give you a decent salary. I'm not sure if it's a
What
decent
seems decent to
salary.
you now, at the very least. Yes.
Exactly. Seems decent because it's going to be higher because of the currency. That's it.
Yeah, it's more than you can get where you are.
Exactly. But that's the thing. You never understand that until you are there. Because the
Yeah.
first people, I guess, and this, like right now with social media, it's really, there's not excuse for you to know that you're gonna be having exactly the exact same money as if you were at home, because
Yeah.
anyway you're gonna have to pay for board and food and transportation, and it might have changed maybe a little bit cheaper or not, but it's gonna be quite the same. The difference is gonna be in a different country with a different language.
Yeah.
But we
Yeah.
like, for so many years before social media, that was so they got away with it for so long.
Oh, they're getting away with it right now. Again, the economics behind it hasn't changed. In many ways, it's accelerated how quickly they can mine resources out of a foreign state, whether it be talent. For instance, there is a reason why, and it goes even deeper. Like if you think about a company like Microsoft, if you phone Microsoft support right now, you're going to get an Indian guy on the other side of the line. It used to be Microsoft had to go and find somebody smart enough and tech savvy enough to help people in that situation, bring them to America, pay them in dollars, and bada bing, bada boom. There you have somebody who can do customer support for Microsoft. Now they don't even have to do that anymore. You can do it all online. So no. You stay there in India,
And I'll pay
okay?
in dollars.
and we'll pay you in dollars so that it seems that you're making a lot of money. And many people are going to go for it. Okay, so they're taking that resource, which is the skills of skilled workers from India, and they're importing it successfully. The result into America without ever having to actually go and catch you and put you in chains and bring you back to America or lure you with a nicer salary. Because obviously, if you were living in anywhere in the States, it was going to cost you what they're paying these guys just to put fuel in your car, pretty much.
It's very
So,
interesting
so in many
how
ways, they've accelerated and streamlined the speed with which they can import resources from a foreign state into their own treasuries.
they
And
call it outsourcing.
yeah, Yeah. Uh, Not only that, like I was talking about Anglo American, they're doing the physical thing. They're mining gold in South Africa and calling it a win for the South Africans when it's them that's getting rich for selling that gold. No South Africans. It's a messy business at the end of the day. In many ways, it was better under the empires. For instance, when you're a colony in the let's go quote unquote traditional sense of the word, then the mother country has to provide for you. Okay, like you said, you're paying the protection, so you need to get at least the protection. They need to build the infrastructure. They need to make sure there is police. They need to keep the crime to a minimum, else they cannot make money. Now they don't have to do any of that. Okay, now that you are free, and they're still stealing from you, by the way. The mines have not closed. The money is still going to Britain, but you get nothing from them in return. Back then, at the very least, and again, I'm not saying this is a good thing, but at the very least, you paid the protection money and you got the protection. Now you're still paying the protection money, but you're not getting anything in return.
They found the smart holes to go
Exactly.
through. There is 152 countries in the world. Is it that the number? I think.
No, there is way more, I believe.
So
Google.
many I'm googling right now. But my point being is so many countries in the world, and we've been told 195 countries in the world, but
Yes.
we still, and now it's more.
And by the way, again, that's 195 recognized states. Within some of those states, you'll find all kinds of things that are not considered countries, but are de facto countries, if you want.
Okay, let's say
For instance,
more
the
than
occupied parts of
195.
Ukraine, it's still a country. There's still people who live there and work, and there's still an economy. But is it Russia? Is it Ukraine? It's disputed. Also, Georgia has a giant piece like that of a country that kind of broke off from it. They said, "Oh, we don't want to be Georgian anymore. We're just gonna kind of blow me here."
What's up with that?
And,
What's up with that?
and the Russians, well, obviously this is politics. The Russians, they were paying some money to these people to say these kinds of things. And not necessarily because they wanted to annex the land, but because they wanted to have a little bit of a buffer zone between themselves and the European Union, which they thought was definitely going to get away with Georgia. And then you have things like the European Union itself. Like, is this a country? Can we consider this a country? Is it the United States of Europe? It certainly isn't. It's not on paper. Not
But
really in effect, but that was the general idea when they came up with it.
and
To
not
have
only
some
that,
unified
they have unified
federal
laws.
state speak for the
Yes.
entire region. It's a federation. That's the long and the short of it. The United Nations is not that united. It's a federation, just like the federal government in America is.
No, fair enough. But the thing is that with more than 195, more than that, as you stated before, it's very interesting that we only recognize around no more than 10 languages as priority or as the main languages of the world. For thousands of dialects and different languages there is, we are being centered in a very small group where everything runs in one or two, even though those 10 exist. Like, everybody wants to learn from that batch because that's going to help you.
Mostly European ones.
Exactly.
That didn't
In
happen
English.
by accident. Yes. Well,
England is no more Europe.
They're no longer a part
Brexit.
of the European Union, no. But it's still part of the European continent, I'm afraid. There's nothing they can do about. And that's the other thing, like nationalism. If you think about it, the lines drawn on these maps that decided where is what, they were drawn by people with objectives in mind. So now you'll have a lot of people like, for instance, the war in Ukraine. They'll say, well, the Russians, and rightfully so, they will say things like, well, the Russians, they're a threat to the sovereignty of Ukraine. Okay. But who drew the line between Russia and Ukraine? Okay. And why did they draw it there? Okay. Few people ask themselves things like that, because the reality is the people who drew that line, I can tell you, by the way, they weren't Russian or Ukrainian. And they had a very clear agenda when they were doing so. Okay. I won't talk about that part because that will get us cancelled for sure. But you can go research. You can go Google who decided where Russia ends and Ukraine begins. So all of these countries, they really just, they're kind of, they're remnants of the past in and of themselves. Okay. Before there were countries, there were the empires, and they kind of drew the lines any way they wanted. They were in the unfortunate position that they had to do so by force. This was there was only one tool in the toolbox for the Romans. You know, what defines what a country is? That's not really set in stone and or reasonably sensical to begin with.
That's a hard question.
Yeah. For instance, if you look at South Africa, we have 11 official languages. I believe there is 3 semi-official languages. In other words, 14 languages total, 11 of which are official and 3 of which are recognized. Okay, so 14 in total.
But everything runs in English.
Well, there is the matter of practicality, right? If we're going to, and this is something we have to accept, if we live in a world where we have contact with everybody, we need to kind of agree on some sort of method of communication. The idea being that languages are kind of like a virus, you know? And they do operate in that kind of sense. Like you spread it to a new area, and then it becomes possible for that area to communicate with this area, and they teach it to the next and the next and the next. And so the language, the barrier, if you wanted to draw a circle around the area of the earth that can speak a specific language, it benefits us all to be able to speak English. Right? The empire is dead. Well, like I said, it's not dead, it's now a bank. But the benefit to speaking and learning English is still very real. Okay.
But that goes tied to the new colonization form. I mean, why did we choose then to speak English and not, I don't know, Portuguese? Why the worldwide world doesn't focus on Portuguese? The reason is
because there were
economical.
the reason is kind of simple. It's because the Brits were better at it than the rest of us. Okay, so
What?
so the Brits conquered such a vast empire, so vastly spread out around the world, and they brought with them their languages and their cultures, so that from India all the way to America, everybody can speak English.
Mm.
Okay, you might find that there are hundreds of thousands of languages in between, which are the home languages of these people. But because they can all speak English, it just makes practical sense for them to speak English with each other. And yes, that is a remnant of colonization. Be it good or bad, the language in and of itself is neither. It's just a language. How we ended up with it and the benefit that it brings to us is still very real.
So
And
it's
this is why
it's a
English.
fourth
The
benefit.
British had a huge empire, much more bigger than the Portuguese Empire, which was also very much a big thing. But you can go to Mozambique. That was a Portuguese colony, and most of the people there speak English. Okay, it's really only Brazil is really the only other country in the world except for Portugal where they speak Portuguese.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
even in Brazil, nowadays, more and more people are learning English because English affords you access to new television shows. It can be something that simple. You want to watch a show, an American TV show, and laugh along. You know, go and learn the language. I had a friend in university, and he actually learned Japanese.
For
So
the
much
anime.
anime did he watch? Yes. So is that Japan colonizing his mind in some way? Yeah, yeah, it absolutely is. But if you make something that someone else wants access to, and the price of admission is learning the language,
It's a
well, what are you
benefit.
going to do?
It's the reason
Yeah,
why in Dominican Republic they started learning Spanish and Italian. It's just to be able to when they got colonized for the first time, it was a way to be able to understand what was happening. Same thing. It's just like whenever you as a person who's been kidnapped or enslaved, you started learning your captor's language. It's not for free. It's just to
yeah,
be able
yeah,
to
yeah.
run into the world. You said it before. It's
Exactly.
information is power.
Information is power. This is how it is. And again, it's messy. It's not clean. It's not good. It's not bad. It's just what it is sometimes.
It's difficult. Is that benefit is a difficult one because, like I said, from the thousands of languages we have in the world, everybody has it's being forced imposed as a benefit for you to be able to understand where your ground is because things work either in English or French, sometimes in Spanish, but very it's a very small portion of the world, or
Yeah.
even Chinese
Yeah.
nowadays.
I mean, on proportion, Chinese is the most spoken language in the world. Most of those people are in China, but again, in China, if you and me, we wanted to move to China and we wanted access to their economical system. In other words, we
Oh,
wanted to go there and make a living and do a job there. We'd have to learn to speak Chinese. That's just the way the world works.
the next thing, because when we talk about colonialism, we really talk about like economy and we talk about like the human resources and all this stuff, but nobody talks about culture. Nobody talks about who really decides what's good or bad in terms of art. Like who is the judge really to tell you that or to help you to be a successful artist, movie maker, writer, and the people who actually like get the say about what's good or bad.
Well,
It's in one specific place.
yeah, yeah, and it's always been like that.
Yeah, but
Unfortunately, art is eh, they say things like beauty is in the eye of the beholder, right? So like art is relative. What is art? Kind of modern art, my feelings around the kind of rubbish, complete rubbish that they venerate nowadays in the art world. Who decided that vomiting on a canvas in multicolors is even art at
art.
all? Okay, but the reality is like if you look at it, there is someone, and knowing who that someone is who dictates that kind of thing is very important to understanding what you're looking at. For instance, and we spoke about this the other night, we had people like the CIA interfering with MTV
Hmm.
and telling them what they're going to play and how they're going to play it and how they're going to portray it. Now, obviously, the CIA, they didn't give a shit about the music. They had ulterior motives. But in doing so, again, we got, some pretty good music out of it. The rest of the world. I mean, I think we can all agree. Like I said, for me, really, Eminem, 50 Cent, these guys made some fantastic music. Okay. I mean, well, what is it? What is it about Andy Warhol that makes him an instant classic? Somebody decided that putting a picture of a soup can on the wall was a good idea. Who that was, I don't know. Is it art? Yeah, I suppose it is. Is it good art? That's completely
That's
relative. That's for
subjective.
each person who looks at it is supposed to decide for themselves. Uh, and very important to note, I suppose the feeling is that well, if a lot of people like Andy Warhol, then Andy Warhol must be a good artist, and that might or might not be true. You know, he might just be. Is it because is because a lot of people like Britney Spears and her music? Does that make her a good singer? you
Oh, she wasn't
know,
bad.
no, she was sorry. She was the first pop icon that sprung to mind, which I guess in itself is saying
Wrong.
something.
Yes,
Yes,
yes.
exactly. But let's take a considerably worse, more modern version. Dua Lipa. Is is she an artist even? I mean, yeah, by most standards, people would say she's an artist. Is she a good artist? Well, no, she isn't, is she? She doesn't write any of her own music. Is she a good performer? Absolutely, because that's what modern music has become. It's become a performance, right? What I'm saying
It
is,
is.
she's nice to look at. She's got the dance moves, and she can entertain people. She's a good entertainer. That doesn't make her necessarily a good artist in the vein of the let's say Bob Dylan's and Elton John's of the world.
I guess that's where we all get confused because once the entertainment industry, or let's say the politics got into the entertainment industry and they started to pushing things, it was, I think at the beginning, like in the MTV era, 2000s, 1990s, 2000s, you didn't have a way to know if what you were being shown was really good or bad. You just assumed that if it was on like national TV or if it got to MTV was good, you know,
Yeah,
because
yeah.
they're supposed to know about uh what they're showing you, like the quality of what they're showing you, but we didn't know what was the
That
actual intention for them
that
to
there
show
was
it to you.
an entire other influence.
Exactly.
That there was also like what do you need to do to become an authority on art? If you understand what I'm saying. And is it, let's take somebody who most people will agree is a reasonably good artist. Okay, uh, Elton John. Okay,
Okay.
very few people will be able to come up with a reasonable argument that he's not a good artist. Okay, because he's the entire package. He's both a good entertainer, he's a wonderful showman, he writes beautiful music. He's
He
clearly,
plays and sings. Yeah.
yeah, he plays it himself. I mean, he writes with somebody else writes for a lot of his work for him,
Yes, his
but he's
friend.
actively involved in the creation process, and he is kind of the guy who's in charge at the end of the day of his own sort of product in many ways that other modern artists will never be. And even him, he has to do what the producers kind of guide him to do. They're going to say, silly things like they said to Led Zeppelin that nobody would ever listen to a 9 minute long rock and roll ballad. They were clearly fucking wrong, because the moment they did Stairway to Heaven, it went to number one and stayed there for years. Okay, it still comes up when people talk about some of the greatest songs ever written. At least there's gonna be one guy with a trucker cap on backwards and a beer saying, "Well, Stairway to Heaven." If you take these people who are clearly good artists, okay, again, I don't think too many people will argue that Elton John is not a good artist. Does that make him an authority on music? In other words, when Elton John gets into his car, it's probably a very nice car. It's probably got a very nice stereo system. He's going to be listening to something, and I'd be willing to bet any amount of money probably not listening to himself. He's not listening to his own albums. Okay, he's listening to somebody else. So being an artist is if being an artist is not what makes you an authority on art, well, what does? Okay, certainly going to school does not make you an authority on art at all, because arguably the type of people who graduate from art history and from arts colleges, then they don't make very good artists.
No,
you know
that I know.
and the reason and the reason for that is quite simple. It's not something you can teach someone, right? Like, you can teach someone to draw a pretty picture, but you can't teach them how to be an artist if they're not already. Okay. And if you take an actual artist and you try to teach them how to draw pretty pictures, you're going to fuck them up, because they're going to be having all of this stuff in their head. It has to be this, it has to have a deeper message, it has to have a this and a that, and it doesn't. It really just needs to be whatever flows from you naturally. You know, the Japanese would call it Zen. Okay, in the Western world, we call it being in the zone. Okay, being able to, that flow state that you get into when you're doing something you're good at. Okay, that's what you need to be a good artist. Uh, you cannot teach that to someone who doesn't have it, and somebody who has it, if you try to teach them, you're probably gonna cripple that process completely.
Because that's
So that's why, yes, exactly, because you're now trying to teach Rembrandt how to paint like Picasso, and vice versa. It's just never going to work. And this is true for all of the art forms, by the way. Whether you're a photographer or a musician or an actor, even, it's not going to make you a better or a worse. Sometimes it might make you a worse artist going to school and learning about it. So obviously, education can also not make you an authority on art. So what can? Who gets to say what is good art and what is not? And at the end of the day, the answer in our world, unfortunately, is money. Money is the answer. Okay. Again, you will, like I said, Elton John is not exactly eating rice cookies and peanut butter for dinner tonight. Okay. This guy is super duper wealthy and super duper recognizable. And he's made millions, if not billions of dollars from entertaining people who pay to see Elton John. Okay, so people have voted with their feet, and I guess that's the only way.
And it's just like when he became a pop star, rock star.
Yeah, I guess he's a pop
somewhere
star,
in
I guess.
between. Yes.
Elton John. Again, putting them in little boxes like that. Again, that's for art school. If you want to understand, or if you want to misunderstand anybody's music or art in general, try to fit them into a little box. That's the best way to misunderstand them.
Which is exactly what they do now, and that's why we get. I guess, I mean, there is like money talks.
Yeah.
They're investing to send a specific message, and I can see now that like you get one good artist for every 5 terrible ones.
Yeah.
But those
Yeah.
5 terrible ones are the ones who are gonna take your message across.
Yeah.
So I guess that's part of the whole problem.
Again, this is such an objective topic, and now to bring it back to the original topic of colonialism, when the English came to South Africa and when the Spanish went to South and Central America, they brought with them obviously the culture.
Yes, of course.
Okay.
Many things that we
And if you think about the Indians, okay, the English went there and did very many horrible things, but they also brought the two things that Indians nowadays love most, and that's cricket and tea. Nowadays, it's almost impossible, and it's the same in South Africa, by the way. It's impossible to conceptualize being a South African without thinking about things like rugby and cricket and tea, which are all things that the English brought, to be honest. Okay. And again, one of the main things about Central and South America, as we call it, Latin America, is the Latin. You know, you guys put it right there in the name. Okay. They brought this spice, which is now one of the quintessential South American things.
That is not
And they did it
ours.
by it's it's not your it wasn't yours originally, but now it's very much. You understand?
It's not.
Now it's very much a part of being of being even just being in Latin America is Spanish culture. And it's been mingled with the original culture of the place in such a way that it makes sense for everybody.
That is very interesting
So
what you're saying because
you have to bring the good with the bad, I guess, is
yes,
kind of what I'm saying.
that's very interesting what you're saying about the specific Latin America because there was a huge discussion after the Super Bowl because Mr. Bad Bunny at the end of the his whole performance he named every single country in Latin America. Yeah. Every single one except for Belize, I think. He forgot or it wasn't in tune with the rhythm of his things. So there was this disparity, like, ooh, like okay, the original Latin American, no, Latin people were like in Europe, like Spanish, and then there
Spanish and Italians, the ones who speak
exactly Lat.
derivatives of Latin. Yes.
That's the thing,
The Portuguese, the Spanish, and the Italians.
but it's funny because before that presentation, like they didn't even think about it. They were just like Latin America, of course, South America, done. It's used as something bad, even. It's like despite the flavor and all the romanticized thing about being Latin American, South America. But at that moment, like it was, I mean, most of the time, Latinos is not really used as something to be proud of, if anything. They're not using it. It's literally a nickname for the I don't know background of the world or a backyard of the world in a way.
Yeah.
Exactly. So when he did that in national television for the whole world, then Spain said, "Hey, hold on, you guys are not Latinos. Now we were not Latinos." They wanted to like bring it back what they used to call us for being below them in a way. So it's just interesting how things change in a split second. There was
Yeah.
nothing special. It was just owning, like you call us Latinos, okay, then we are Latinos. It is what it is. But then you said no, you're not.
Yeah.
If anything,
Yeah. Yeah.
Hispanic, Hispanic.
Hispanic. I mean, that sounds a lot like somebody trying to hide the reality of what had happened. I mean, they didn't. Let's be honest. They exported a lot of murder and they did a lot of bad things. There was a lot of exploitation all over the world because of these things. But they also exported what was good about themselves.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And people held on to that and made it their own in many ways. All over the world, this not only the Spanish, also the Commonwealth countries, you know they held on to what was good about the English and they tried to let go of what was bad. So denying it, I don't think is the right way to go. Acknowledging it for what it is perfectly fair. Okay. It's something, like you said, it was something that you did not choose per se. But denying it is definitely not going to make it any better anyway. It's not something that you can act like it's not like some stepchild. You can put them in the corner and forget that they existed. It's there. It's obvious. Okay, so what are you gonna do? Uh, you have to take the good with the bad, and it's
I
the
wonder.
same with what we were talking earlier about languages. Yes, my forefathers certainly didn't. As a matter of fact, what my even just my grandparents used to literally call English the language of the Antichrist. Like literally, that's what they called it. Okay, they did not choose it either, but again, it gives you access to all of these opportunities. And by the time I came around, there was certainly no way to be in the world without being able to speak it. So here we are.
It's funny how you get so judged by it. Like there's no middle ground. You get judged to stay true to your ground and say, okay, I don't want to learn any language. And you get judged because you want to be part of the system, because regardless, either good or bad, being part of the system gets you to places. I mean, we cannot
Exactly.
say it doesn't, but
Exactly.
it's like it's never enough for the world.
Yeah, like I said, and the reason is it's because they want it to be either good or bad. They want it to be black or white. They want to point at this and say this is bad, and they want to point at that and say that is good. But it is literally never that simple. So you cannot make something into something it is not, and that's why it will never make complete sense, because most things are two sides of a coin. Okay, there are trade-offs involved in almost everything that we do as human beings. Sometimes the trade-offs are obvious, sometimes they are not that obvious at all. You just have to try to keep the good bits and cast away the bad bits and carry on forward. I think this is also another mistake that people who talk about colonialism makes. They talk about colonialism as if the English or the Spanish or the Portuguese or the Dutch are
Dead.
going to come
Yeah.
and save them, okay, are going to come and somehow make it right. They cannot, okay? Even if they wanted to, they cannot. It's not possible to mend what happened in the past. So talking about it isn't going to change anything either. You know, even acknowledging it is not going to change anything. What can change it is looking in the other direction, right? If you're continuously looking to the past, you are almost certain to repeat it in some way or another. So what these people do when they're talking about colonialism and being highly critical of it, which I understand, is absolutely nothing. They're doing absolutely nothing to improve their own place in the world. They're literally just complaining about where they ended up when the chips fell from the sky, pretty much. Because let's be honest, it makes a big difference whether you got colonized by the Spanish or the Portuguese or the Dutch, or because, like I said, they had all slightly different approaches. So if you look at the Americans, by the way, the chips happened to fall pretty good for them. Okay, you know, they became the oppressor themselves in quite a short space of time, uh, mind you. From they went from being an English French colony to oppressing other and being a colonist themselves in like zero time. Like the Civil War was basically still raging, and these people were already colonizing, you know, places like the Dominican Republic. It's ridiculous when you talk about things like this person is a colonist or that person is a colonist. Just remember that there's a very fine line, and the people went from being the colonized to the colonist in absolute, like I said, also the English themselves,
Zero
they were
time.
colonized.
Mm.
The Portugal in itself was lands given to some religious organization by the Spanish king. Okay, so the people who lived in Portugal, their king gave them away to these French, Italian speaking, you know, holy armies, and they had to deal with it. Okay, they ended up being colonizing other parts of the world themselves. Just hold your horses when you're being so highly critical of these things that you don't really understand, and think for a second that it is in the past. Okay, it was terrible. It was often violent. Was often and is up to this point in time not fair. But you cannot fix that by sitting around and whining and complaining about it all day. That's not going to make it better. It cannot, it will not. You have to start thinking about the future. At some point, you have to let the past be in the past. That's pretty much what I'm saying. Else it will drag you down 100%, because the past is, I mean, like we've discussed, complicated and fucked up. And there were almost no good guys. Let's just be clear here. Nobody was an innocent victim in all of this. Even if somebody was an innocent victim, and there were plenty of innocent victims on both sides, it turns out that you could switch from being the victim to the aggressor in absolutely no time whatsoever. So the idea that the English pitched up in South Africa and they found these docile and helpless tribesmen there is rubbish. What made it so English for the Dutch and the English to colonize South Africa is because these were already busy murdering each other. Okay, they just happened to be able to take advantage of that. They were in a position to take advantage. So there are no victims. There are no outright oppressors. Again, the English went from being oppressed by the North to oppressing somebody else virtually overnight. The Americans went from being a colony to colonizing somebody else virtually overnight. Okay. Human beings will human being. This is the constant. If you happen to land on the bottom of this gigantic shit pile that is, modern politics, that's really unfortunate. But what's going to get you out of it is not, somebody else is not going to come and lift you out of your oppressed state. It's you have to do it for yourself.
That's a tough mindset to get people in. Just because, I mean, you said, I mean, I agree, we have to get over the past, but unfortunately, like, that seems what keeps the wheel going. It seems like it's more like a tool instead of
Yeah,
just pure
exactly.
nostalgia.
That,
Like they use
that,
the
that,
nostalgia and like the past as a way to keep going, direct us toward what we don't want anymore.
yeah,
But we're
exactly.
still there.
And you even said it. You called it a wheel. It's a cycle, right?
Mhm.
Like I said, it's just keeps going around in circles and gets you nowhere. Okay? It's a completely circular rhetoric that traps you in a very specific mindset, and the only way is to break that cycle.
And also, not only break the cycle, not only by get over the past, but also realizing that we've been in in the same situation for always, forever.
Yeah,
It's just
yeah.
like
And it's
they
not about.
change
It's
names.
not like get over it, get over the past. No, that's not what I mean. First of all, when you're upset about these kind of things, learn about them and educate yourself to the point where you know what happened in the past and you know what's real and you understand what happened in the past. And then that way you can see much more clearly what the way forward is going to be. Okay, because now you're in this kind of constant argument about these are the good guys, those are the bad guys. This is not getting anybody anywhere, right? The reality is we're kind of all in this little boat together, and everybody is arguing, but no one is battling. Okay, that's the
Going in
that's the
circles.
reality of the story, you know. So somebody somewhere, some people need to start battling.
That's gonna take long.
It might take long. Uh, the winds of change, they are blowing. You know, people are slowly learning ways to meet each other in the middle, and like I say, learning about the past and accepting it for being the past and finding ways to move forward. This is happening slowly but surely. I mean, I think our problem as human beings is we get to see only a small snapshot of it. And we'd all like to snap our fingers. And tomorrow, when we wake up, the world is a better place. But the reality is that's not how it works. It's a million small actions that over the course of a lifetime or 2 or 3 generations is able to change the world, hopefully for the better. Right now, it looks like we're kind of going backwards.
Yeah, it's a scary position to be in now.
True story.
Yes, we never learn the lesson completely.
Thank you for being part of this conversation.
If something landed, share it. Find us on Spotify, Cosecha Salvaje Wild Conversations, link in the description.
See you next week.